we've reached the most fun part of this course, animations. In this part, we're going to make things move. Because if we take a look at our page, everything still looks a little static. Let's change that. In this course, we're going to take a look at the different types of animations we can apply to our elements. We'll also cover the timeline and how we can use it to adjust the timings of our animations. And we'll also explore the difference between the timeline and viewport animation triggers. And lastly, we'll also cover how you can animate entire groups at once. Let's add some start animations, as these make our elements come into view more fluently. And this makes everything a bit more animated. I'll select the energy title and head on over to the animation tab. Let's enable the start animation and I'll apply the fade step animation type. We can also add some easing to the animation so it just flows a little better. Let's select the back out option. Now, for the direction, I want it to come in from the left side. So for this fade step animation, I can also set the distance for it to travel. Let's set it to 60 pixels. Let's preview the page and see how it looks. Notice how all of the elements are already there, but the energy title is flowing in nicely. Bit slow, so I'll reduce the duration from 1 second to 0.5. Now, for the other elements, I could go about and manually apply the same animation to them. But of course, there's a better way. If I right-click the elements, we'll see an option to copy the animation. Now, all I need to do is select all the other elements, right-click and hit Paste Animation. Maybe change the direction on some to make the whole thing flow a little better. Preview it again. Perfect.
That was just a start animation though. What about the other types?
I'm getting there. Now, let's move a bit further down the page, and more specifically to the music part with the sambas. And we're going to make them move continuously, and we'll do that with the repeating animation type. I'll select a samba and enable the repeating animation. For these animation, the duration is defined in milliseconds, so a value of 1000 means 1 second here. I'll use the move animation and repeat it indefinitely. Set the direction and intensity and copy and paste the animation on the right samba and maybe change the duration a little bit, and that's it. Now for the end animation, which lets me make the elements disappear from view. And this is especially useful if you're working with pop-ups because you can both open and close them. So let's select the pop-up we created for the foro title, and I'm heading to the animations tab. I'll add an end animation, select the fade step, and let's move it towards the left for a distance of 10 pixels. Set the duration to 0.2 and let's preview to see what that looks like. As if it's moving into the button when it's leaving my view. Let's do the same for when it comes into view with a starting animation. Preview that again. Perfect. Lastly, there's a fourth type of animation too. The scroll path animation, which is available on long pages. And this allows me to draw out a path for the element to follow as my viewer scrolls down the page. And we'll cover this in an advanced part of this course. But it's time.
For what?
Line.
Line?
Timeline. Because back in the first scene of our page, we had the Start to Story button, which I want to come into view just a little bit later than all of my other elements. And for that, we need to use the timeline that starts playing when the page loads up. So let's open up the timeline by clicking the button all the way in the bottom left. I can now see a list of all of my elements along with a blue line that shows all of the animations I applied to them. I can drag the far ends of this blue line to either add a delay or to make my element disappear from view after a certain amount of time. Notice how there's numbers at the top, ranging from 1 to 10. These represent either the amount of seconds or the distance in terms of pixels for which my element remains in view. And if the value is set to 10, or when the element's blue line is dragged all the way to the far end of the timeline, the elements will remain in view indefinitely. So, to add a delay to the Start the Story button in my first scene, I need to drag the left end of the blue line. Let's set that to 1 or 1 second to make sure the button only comes into view after 1 second. Moving on to the ways in which we can trigger our animations. Because by default, our animations are timed, meaning that they start playing after a certain amount of seconds, defined by the value we set in the timeline. So if I add a delay of 1 second, like we did with the Start to Story button in the first scene, the button will show 1 second after the page finishes loading. However, sometimes when we have animations further down the page, we don't know when our viewer reaches that point. Like this image here. Someone scanning the page might read this point within 2 seconds, but detailed readers might take a minute or even more to reach this point. So in these cases, we can't use timed animations to predict when our viewers reach this point. That's where the viewport animation trigger comes in. The viewport is the visible area of a web page when it's viewed. So only when this part of the page comes into view on my viewer's screen, the animation will trigger. When we click this option, we suddenly see a start option appearing, along with some additional values. The first one marks the percentage of the viewport which the element needs to touch in order to fire the animation. I'm sure my explanation made it even more vague than it initially was, but we made a solution for that. I'll set this value to 20% and head into preview mode. On the left, you can see an option called Trigger Lines, which now lays some horizontal lines on top of my page. On the left-hand side, you can also see some percentages. 0% marks the bottom of my viewport, while 100% marks the top of my viewport. Notice how the element comes into view when the top of my element hits the 20% line. That's because I set the value to 20%. And a higher value makes the element show a little later, while lower values make it show earlier. Now, we saw an additional setting next to this percentage value. This marks which part of the element this trigger line should listen to. Right now, the animation starts when the top of my element touches that 20% line. But I could also change this to make the animation start when the center or even the bottom of my element touches this line. This gives me the ability to more precisely determine when my element should come into view. We can also see a third option, the scroll triggers. We'll cover that option in one of the advanced courses. Right, so previously when we added an end animation to the pop-up, you may have noticed that I applied the animation to the entire group. This caused all of the elements inside of that group, or the text and both shapes, to be included in this animation automatically. This is very handy as everything stays flexible this way. If I remove an element from this group or add a new one to it, I don't have to manually adjust the animations. Now, I can also animate both the group and the elements inside of it, which we're going to do with our navigation menu, because I want the navigation menu to appear first and then all of the options to appear one after another. Now, for the elements inside of it. Let's make those fade in from the center, also with a 0.5 duration. Copy and paste the animation to all of the other elements. Okay, so I want everything to come in one after another. So let's open the timeline and start by adding a small delay to the entire navigation menu group. 0.3 seconds is enough. But notice how the elements inside of this group are now automatically included in this delay too. So their animations can only trigger when the group's animation is triggered first. Now, let's add a small delay to each of the elements inside of this group by dragging their markers on the left-hand side. I'll make each element come in just a little bit later. So 0.2 for the first element, 0.3 for the second, and so forth. Let's hit preview mode to see what it looks like. And notice how everything comes into view just a little bit after each other. And with these techniques, we can animate each and every element on our page. I'll leave that to the post-production team though, but before we finish this course, I've got a bonus for you. Because we're going to use the techniques we just learned to make the ball in the Yoga Bonito section come rolling into view. So, let's select the group that contains the ball and enable a start animation for it. I'll set it to viewport and make it start at 20%. Duration 1 is fine. Let's select the move animation type and make it move in from the right-hand side of the screen. Preview that. Okay, so now it moves, but the ball doesn't roll yet. Let's fix that. Select the ball and enable the starting animation on this one too. This time we'll select the rotate animation. When we take a look at the timeline, notice how both of these animations are running simultaneously. So while the entire group is moving from right to left, the ball is rolling. When I go into preview mode to actually view the animations, it looks like the ball's actually rolling into view.
Cool. How did you do that?
I literally just explained it.
I missed it. Sorry.
I gave the entire group a move starting animation, and I gave the ball within that group a rotate starting animation. And combining those two made the ball come rolling into view. So, in this course, we learned about the start, repeating, and end animation types. We also covered the timeline and how we can use it to add a delay or make our elements disappear after a certain amount of seconds. We also explored the ways to trigger an animation with either the timeline or viewport options. And we saw how we could animate entire groups, but also the elements inside of them. We finished with a bonus on how to make a ball come rolling into view. So, over all of these courses, we finally finished our page. And would you look at that end result?
We haven't touched the mobile version yet though.
Yep, I saved the best for last. Let's set up the mobile version in the absolute final part of this course.